EDH Deck Building. I'm your host Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your commander decks, episode 9. Starting out this week with Power Matrix. 4 mana artifact, you just tap it and it gives target creature +1/+1, flying, first strike, trample. That's a whole lot of abilities. I have this in my Questing Beast deck. So my Questing Beast already has Death Touch, Haste, and Vigilance, and then also gets flying, first strike, and trample, and +1/+1. That's a whole lot of abilities. This is just a great thing to have if you want to give your commander any of these specific abilities. So for example, you think of a commander like Tana, right? Any Tana or any commander that wants to be connecting and dealing damage, Tana's going to get +1/+1 and flying. So that's going to give her evasion, and she's buffed. So now she's going to make 3 Saproling tokens instead of 2. There's a lot of commanders out there that you just want to give flying to give them evasion. If you have a commander that has Death Touch, first strike goes really good with Death Touch. And I'm sure there's a lot of commanders out there that want trample. So you can just use this as any sort of a Voltron strategy if you want, just to give your commander a whole bunch of abilities, but you can also use it to give your commander evasion. You can also use it to give them specific abilities that you might be looking for. I think it's great. It's colorless, obviously. I think it goes in a lot of decks. Another colorless one, Predator Flagship. This one used to get used a lot more. Again, it's a card that got printed in Commander 2014 because it was getting used quite a bit in Commander back in the day, because it's an answer. You know, if you have a deck that struggles with killing creatures, this can do that, especially if you're in a colorless deck, right? If you're playing a colorless commander, you know, your options for killing creatures are very limited. This is one of them, right? So you're going to pay 5 to tap it and destroy target creature with flying, but you can also pay to give a creature flying, right? So essentially what you're going to do is pay 7 mana and tap it to kill any creature, which is a lot. I mean, that's a lot. It is repeatable. That's a lot of mana though. I mean, you can, if there's a creature with flying, you only have to pay 5. However, if you're in a bind, it is an answer. In Tabor and Lumia decks though, because Tabor and Lumia can give creatures flying, so you only have to pay the 5 after you cast a blue spell. But even better than that, I think it goes in a Zirda deck, you know, because Zirda is going to reduce both of the costs. It's going to reduce the first cost and the second cost. So if you destroy a creature with flying, it only costs 3 mana, and if you have to make a creature flying, then it's only going to cost 4 total. So you're paying 4 total mana in a Zirda deck to destroy any creature. That seems pretty good, especially since it's repeatable. Next up, Presence of the Master. Again, a very unique, interesting card that has a very unique ability, just 4 mana. It's an enchantment. Whenever a player casts an enchantment spell, counter it. That's it. It just completely locks down all enchantments. I mean, this can be so good in certain situations. Again, if you're a player who, someone in your pod maybe has an enchantment tribal deck that they always kick your butt with, they're not going to love when you play this, right? It doesn't prevent people from playing enchantments. They can still cast them. They just get countered when they cast them. So I suppose there is maybe a way around this where you can make your enchantments uncounterable. But essentially, this is just going to really screw over anyone who's playing heavy enchantments. Or even if you just want to make a deck, you know, I used to have a Naya deck where I hated on artifacts and enchantments. And this could definitely go in it. And let me tell you, that strategy, if you have a strategy of just hating on artifacts and enchantments, there's very few decks that can survive that, because a lot of decks rely heavily on them. Next up, Primal Order, another enchantment, 4 mana. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, Primal Order deals damage to that player equal to the number of non-basic lands they control. So again, this is sort of following in that theme that I've been talking about, where people are trending more towards more colors in their decks, 5-color decks and whatnot. You know, a Golos deck, for example, most popular commander in the format, is going to have a lot of non-basic lands. I guarantee you, when someone casts their Golos, they're not going to get a basic land out of their deck. They're going to get a non-basic land. So this is really going to hurt them. This is one of the few cards, you know, one of the reasons why Golos is so powerful is because he basically pays his own commander tax, because you're ramping every time you cast him. You know, if you kill Golos, the Golos player is just like, yeah, whatever, I'll just go get it, you know, an Urborg out of my deck to go with my Cabal coffers, or I'll go get a bounce land out of my deck that's essentially giving me 2 mana, which is going to pay for the commander tax. It's really obnoxious. This is one of the ways you beat a deck like that, because he keeps going and getting more non-basic lands, and then he's taking 7 damage on his upkeep, and then he's taking 8, and then he's taking 9. Even a lands deck like a Lord Windgrace deck, this can hurt quite a bit. Obviously, this hits all players, so you don't want to play this in a deck with a lot of different colors either. Mono green, maybe Gruul, something like that. Next up, Pure Reflection. This is a really interesting one. Again, another enchantment. 3 mana, 2 and a white. Whenever a player casts a creature spell, destroy all reflections. Then that player creates an XX white reflection creature token, where X is the converted mana cost of that spell. So it's basically what happens is you play this, and then the first person to cast a creature spell, it doesn't do anything because there's no reflections in play. But when the player casts the spell, they're going to create an XX reflection token that is that converted mana cost. It's not a copy of the creature, it's just the converted mana cost. So if you cast a Llanowar Elves, it's going to give you a 1/1 reflection token. That's it. It's just a blank vanilla creature that is equal to the converted mana cost of the spell being cast, and this works on everybody, right? So the next player goes, and I know people say, okay, well, you're going to give your opponent, someone's going to cast a Woodfall Primus and make an 8/8 token. But I've played this card, and I've never actually seen a case where someone gets to attack with their tokens, because they cast them, they come into play, and then the very next guy goes, he casts a creature, and the one that is already in play gets destroyed, right? So basically what you're doing is everyone just keeps casting creatures, and the reflections that get created are getting destroyed over and over and over again. Now, why the heck would you want to use this? Well, you want to use this in a deck where you want creatures to be dying all the time, right? Because this is a destroy effect. I used this in my Elenda deck. This was great in an Elenda deck because, again, Elenda doesn't care about token creatures. Is just whenever a creature dies, she gets a counter. So what this becomes in an Elenda deck is every time someone casts a creature spell, Elenda gets a counter, right? Because it's going to kill all the reflections that are already in play. So it works good in any deck where you want creatures to be dying all the time. Next up, Purgatory. Another interesting one, another enchantment. There seems to be a lot of enchantments in this episode. It's 4, 2 white, and a black. Whenever a non-token creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, exile that card. Okay, so that's important because the creature that's dying is actually going to go to the graveyard. Okay, this is not a replacement effect. So if you're playing in an aristocrat style deck, which this might work in, that creature actually does go to the graveyard before it gets exiled. So you are going to get that Blood Artist trigger. That's definitely relevant. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 4 mana and 2 life. If you do, return a card exiled with Purgatory to the battlefield. So this is going to return cards directly to the battlefield. That's a really powerful ability. If you think you have a card like an Angel of Despair, for example, okay, that creature dies, you exile it, and then on your upkeep, you can pay 4 mana and 2 life to put it directly into play. That's pretty good. I had a deck that had this similar sort of effect. I talked about this when I was doing my Aura deck tech about how I had a Athreos deck that had that sort of theme of, I want my creatures to be dying, my Angel of Despair and my Ashen Rider. I put coin counters on them, they die, then come back, I get that ETB again. And Purgatory also works with a theme like that. It works great in any sort of theme where you want your creatures to be dying and coming back. I'm thinking in an Aristocrats deck, your creatures are really cheap, so maybe 4 is a lot. The 2 life shouldn't hurt you because usually you're draining lots in an Aristocrats deck. I don't know, I just think this is a card that fits in a lot of decks, especially in black and white, because there's a lot of that recursion, reusing sort of theme. Next up, Pursuit of Knowledge, another enchantment. I swear I'm not doing this on purpose. So this is white card draw. It is an old one, a very unique one. So if you would draw a card, you may put a study counter on Pursuit of Knowledge instead. Then you remove 3 study counters from Pursuit of Knowledge and you sacrifice it to draw 7 cards. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to skip 3 draws to draw 7 cards. So you're netting 4 draws, right? You're netting 4 cards. So this is 4 mana, draw 4 cards, which is fantastic, especially in white. However, the problem is you got to wait, right? You got to wait till those counters are on it. So what can happen is you can get in a situation where you skip a couple draws, then your opponent destroys it and you get nothing out of it. So, maybe this is good in a situation where you're maybe drawing cards already, which seems kind of silly, since if you're drawing cards already, then maybe you don't do this, and it's sort of like a catch-22. But there can definitely, I mean, you can just put this in a mono white deck if you want to draw cards, and you just risk it, and maybe you get the 7 cards, maybe you don't. This can also be good, though, I think, in maybe more of a wheel strategy, though, again, wheel strategies usually aren't in white. There's definitely some decks that this can fit in, though, I think. Maybe an Atraxa Proliferate, right? Because you can proliferate the counters to get those draws quicker. You know, it's a tricky one. It's definitely a tricky one, but you can work around it. I mean, drawing 7 cards is pretty good. So I think it's worth trying to work around. Next up, Putrification, another enchantment. I swear this is the last one. 5 mana. It's black. And I put this one on here because I had just done my list of color-specific cards, basically color hate cards, right? Cards that hate on certain other colors and whether or not they're worth playing or not. And this one maybe should have made the list. Whenever a player casts a green or white spell, that player discards a card. That's really good, okay? Again, it hates on green and white. You can't do this, right? This is not just for opponents, it's for you too. So you can't put this in your Orzhov deck or your Golgari deck. That's not going to work. But anything else, any black deck that doesn't have green or white, anytime any of your opponents cast a green or white spell they have to discard, that's brutal. Again, if you think of an Atraxa deck, they're going to be casting green and white spells like crazy. You know, I think I put Bereavement in that list. It's cheaper, but because Putrification hits white and green, it might even be better. Again, I'm thinking of decks like Tulane and Atraxa and stuff that they're white and green, because people usually don't think of white as powerful, but there's a lot of really powerful decks that have white in them, right? So this probably would have made that list if I had seen it beforehand. Next up, Reyna Daggers. Man, I've never seen this card before, and I think it's pretty good. You know, 6 mana. You know, that's kind of a lot for a board wipe, but you destroy all creatures target opponent controls. This is targeted. You lose 2 life for each creature destroyed this way. Okay, so this is a little, Phyrexian Purge-esque, very similar to that card, which I did in my last list. It also reminds me of River's Rebuke a lot, where it's 6 mana and it's targeting one player and you're sort of just going after that one guy. It can be really good if one guy is way ahead. You know, you're going to pay the life, but if you think about it, say he's got 4 creatures, you know, and I mean, if he's got like little 1/1 tokens, who cares? You're obviously only going to use this when someone's a serious threat. So if someone has 4 big creatures on board, you can pay, 6 and 8 life to kill them all. I just think being able to target one player can be really, really good. And you really don't see this often. You really don't see a board wipe that only targets one player. And lastly today, Radiate. And a lot of people are going to see this one and a smile is going to come across their face, because this is one of those cards that if you've ever seen it in a game, things can get a little silly. This card gets played a lot in chaos decks. People will throw this in their chaos deck just because it creates a lot of chaos a lot of time, but it can also be really good. And red, for example, as I've said before, doesn't deal with enchantments very well. So someone wants to destroy an enchantment with their Nature's Claim. You're going to copy the Nature's Claim with Radiate, and it's going to hit every permanent in play that it can target, right? It's going to copy that spell for each other permanent or player that spell could target. And Nature's Claim can target artifacts and enchantments. So you're going to destroy all the artifacts and all of the enchantments in play with this. You know, Path to Exile. Someone wants to path your creature. You go, hey, how about we just exile all creatures? I mean, there's just a lot of ways to use this card. It's another card that I saw. I won't say I saw a lot back in the day, but I saw a few times. Mono red players like to put this in their deck sometimes because it can be an answer for things that you can't do, like exiling creatures or destroying enchantments. Just a lot of ways to use this card. It can also just be a ton of fun in a game, to be quite honest. It's sort of like Inktreader Nephilim in a way. I had an Inktreader Nephilim deck once, even though it's not a legendary creature. Sometimes people will let you get away with that. And that deck was just tons of fun because it's doing a similar thing. So that is it for today. I have a Patreon if you feel like supporting the channel. The link is in the description below, and thanks for tuning in.